For a long time, I always knew my parents favored my older sister, Vicki, more than me. She was their first child, the one they planned for, while I came along just 10 months later as an unexpected pregnancy. I often felt like I was an afterthought, something they reluctantly kept rather than truly wanted. My maternal grandparents passed away before I was born, but my paternal grandparents were still very much a part of my life, playing a significant role in raising me. Grandma and Grandpa were constants for me, offering the love and stability that often felt lacking from my parents. I distinctly remember being left behind with my grandparents while my parents took Vicki on trips. When I was younger, I didn't mind as much, I enjoyed the time with them. But as I grew older, around the age of 6 or 7, it became clear how unfair it was. My issues weren't just with my parents. Vicki was part of the problem too. While I didn't resent her, I couldn't help but feel like I didn't belong in my own family. She seemed to always make me feel like an outsider, treating me more like a rival than a sibling. From grades to attention, we were constantly in competition. But it always felt like I was the one losing, because my parents always seemed to favor her. The competition between us was unspoken but ever present. When Vicki wanted to be friends with a group of girls but was too shy, I introduced her to the group since I already knew one of the girls through art class. She was jealous and insisted that my parents make me include her. My mom called me selfish, and my dad insisted I take care of her since she was my sister. Reluctantly, I did, but it wasn't long before Vicki began to make things difficult for everyone. She didn't fit in well with the group. She tried too hard to impress them and often came off as awkward. One time, when one of the girls had a crush on a guy, Vicki decided to step in and tell the guy about it. He laughed it off and shared it with everyone, which embarrassed the girl. After that, the girls made it clear they didn't want Vicki around, and I agreed not to bring her along again. But Vicki wasn't going to take that rejection quietly. She threw a tantrum, accusing me of abandoning her, and went to our parents to demand that I stop hanging out with mean girls. My parents took her side, saying I should get the girls to forgive her. But I stood firm and refused, telling my parents I wasn't going to jeopardize my friendships for her. They were furious with me, but I didn't back down. Those girls remain my friends to this day, and I have shared some of my happiest moments with them. Despite everything, I still doubted myself at times. I questioned whether I was right to choose my own happiness over what my parents wanted. But things between Vicki and me only got worse. There was another incident with a boy she liked, one I barely knew. He asked me to junior prom, but I politely declined, as I was already going with someone else. When Vicki found out, she exploded, accusing me of flirting with him for months and stealing what should have been hers. She called me horrible names, and my parents sided with her again, lecturing me on girl code. I tried to explain, but Vicki wasn't having it, and that only led to more conflict. The breaking point came when my dad took me out for ice cream. He wanted to talk, and at first, I was pleased. But then, he started asking invasive questions about my relationship with my boyfriend, whether we were careful, if my boyfriend came from a good family, or if we were doing drugs. When I asked why he was asking, he revealed that Vicki had been spreading lies about me using drugs and drinking. I showed him my phone to prove it wasn't true, but when he confronted her, she spun more lies and claimed I was hiding things from everyone. That's when she punched me. It came completely out of nowhere, and I never imagined she could be violent. My nose bled, and I fell to the floor in pain. As my parents rushed me to the hospital, they begged me not to press charges, pleading that it would ruin Vicki's life. Vicki didn't care. She didn't even apologize. At the hospital, I told the nurse everything, and she reported it to CPS. My parents were furious with me for involving CPS, seeing it as a betrayal. They argued that Vicki's actions were a one-time mistake. They insisted that she wasn't dangerous, and in the end, Vicki was given a warning. But my parents told me I had torn the family apart. My mother cried, saying I was destroying everything by involving outsiders, and my dad expressed his disappointment. In the midst of their anger, I stood my ground. I told them I didn't want anything more to do with Vicki, and they reluctantly agreed. While I did feel guilty for involving the authorities, for the first time, I felt safe in my own home. Since then, Vicki has stopped speaking to me. I much prefer the distance. It's better than living under her constant scrutiny, and I finally feel like I can move forward. When my grandparents learned about the incident with Vicki, they told me to pack my bags and come live with them for the rest of high school. They informed my parents, who didn't put up much of a fight, so I left to live with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' home, where I often felt unwanted, I felt safe and loved with them. The rest of high school passed without incident, and I formed lasting memories with my friends. During this time, my parents never reached out, and I never made an effort to contact them, knowing they were focused on their beloved daughter. It hurt, but I couldn't bring myself to try and force a relationship that seemed so one-sided. When graduation came, my parents only showed up for Vicki. They didn't even acknowledge me, and it felt like I wasn't even part of their world anymore. My grandparents were there, though, and they scolded my parents for their blatant favoritism. I'm not sure what my grandfather said to them, but afterward, my dad awkwardly approached me and offered a congratulatory word. Later, I learned I had been accepted to a great college on a full scholarship. I was thrilled, not just because of the scholarship but because I knew I wouldn't need to rely on my parents for financial support. I shared the news with my grandparents, and they were overjoyed, treating me to a nice dinner to celebrate. My grandmother posted photos of me on Facebook, proudly sharing how proud she was. Soon, relatives started congratulating me, and I guess some of them reached out to my parents. The next day, my mother called me, furious that I was rubbing it in by sharing my success. She told me that Vicki had locked herself in her room crying, because she hadn't been accepted into any college yet and that my celebrating was only making things worse. I was heartbroken that my mother could blame me for Vicki's sadness, especially when Vicki's actions had directly caused so much pain in our family. That phone call was the last I spoke to my mother for a long time. My grandparents helped me move into my college dorm, and by that time, I had broken up with my high school boyfriend since our colleges were far apart. I embraced the independence that came with this new chapter, excited to meet new people. That's when I met Rob. We were both freshmen and spent many hours in the library. Rob and I quickly bonded over our shared love of learning, and our friendship eventually blossomed into something more. After a few months, I realized I had feelings for him that went beyond friendship. As an extrovert, I was upfront about my feelings, and I was delighted to find that he felt the same way. We've been together for 8 years now. Rob's parents treat me like their own daughter, and Rob's mom often tells me how she always wished for a daughter and is so glad to have me in the family. This has been the first time I've felt truly accepted and loved by in-laws, and it's a feeling I cherish deeply. Rob listens to my childhood stories with empathy and understanding, and I finally feel like I have a family that values me. In the 8 years since, my parents have hardly contacted me. They occasionally send birthday texts, but that's about it. Recently, Rob proposed to me during a hike to our favorite sunrise spot, and it was a beautiful, heartfelt moment. I posted about it on Instagram and shared the news with my grandparents, who were over the moon with joy. The news eventually made its way to my parents, who called me out of nowhere to congratulate me. After a brief, awkward exchange about my life, my dad asked if he could walk me down the aisle. I was taken aback, especially since he hadn't even known which company I worked for. I told him I hadn't thought about it yet, and he insisted that it would be embarrassing if I didn't ask him. I scoffed, telling him I wasn't sure I was even going to invite them, since we had barely been in contact. My mother, not happy with my response, lectured me about family traditions and how they would always be my parents, no matter what. A part of me wanted to let bygones be bygones and point his offer, but another part of me couldn't forget all the hurt and disappointment I had suffered at their hands. Still, I told my dad he could walk me down the aisle, and he seemed overjoyed. During the wedding planning, I reached out to my high school friends to ask them to be my bridesmaids. They were thrilled and immediately agreed, excited to reunite and celebrate this milestone together. We planned a bachelorette party in Vegas, and it was full of laughter, fun, and unforgettable moments. However, when I got home, my parents called to express their disappointment that I hadn't invited Vicki to the celebration. I told them there was no way I would include her, and I made it clear that she wasn't part of my life anymore. I explained that her actions had caused me too much pain, and I couldn't invite someone who had been so hurtful to such an intimate event. My parents were furious. They insisted that I had a duty to invite my sister and that it was my responsibility to include her. They told me Vicki had been looking forward to meeting me since learning about the wedding. I was confused. How could she have been looking forward to it when we hadn't spoken in years? They dismissed my concerns and kept pushing the issue, telling me it would look bad to exclude her. But I stood firm. I told them I was fine with people talking behind my back. The most important thing to me was that I surrounded myself with people I loved and trusted. My mother tried to guilt-trip me by suggesting that my in-laws would judge me, but I reassured her that they understood the dynamics of my family and wouldn't care either way. In the end, we agreed to disagree. I informed my grandparents about the conversation, and they fully supported my decision. They told me I shouldn't force myself to invite anyone I didn't want at my wedding. My parents were, as usual, trying to guilt-trip me, and I wasn't going to let them. I've been feeling more at peace with my decision as the wedding day draws closer. Lately, I've been busy planning, but last week, my dad called with unexpected news. He said after much thought, he and Mom had decided they wouldn't attend my wedding. Before I could process this, he added that this also meant he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle. I asked why, and he explained that Vicki was moving into a new place, with their help, and since I was excluding her from the wedding, she planned to host a housewarming on the same day. So, my parents would be attending her event instead of mine. Shock and disbelief hit me as I absorbed his words. It stung to realize that my sister's housewarming had taken precedence over my wedding, amplifying the hurt and betrayal I've carried for so long. I simply told him I understood, trying to mask the deep pain I was feeling, and ended the call. Despite trying to stay strong, the rejection hit harder than anything I'd imagined. When I told Rob, he was furious at how selfish my parents were, especially after they'd insisted on attending. He suggested I ask my grandfather to walk me down the aisle instead since he and my grandmother had been more like parents to me than my own. I agreed, and I called my grandparents right away, barely holding back tears. "You've always been there for me," I told them, my voice breaking. "You've been like parents to me, and I can't imagine anyone else walking me down the aisle." Without hesitation, they said yes. Their support filled me with relief and warmth. I knew, at that moment, that no matter what my parents did or didn't do, I had a family who truly loved me. I also spoke to my in-laws, who reassured me they didn't care if my parents came. They were just happy to be there to celebrate with us. With my wedding now just 2 days away, I woke up to missed calls from my dad, expecting an emergency. I called back, and he immediately asked if it was true that my grandparents were walking me down the aisle. I confirmed, and that's when he began berating me for asking them. I reminded him that he had chosen not to attend, so I didn't see why he was upset. He went on about how they had raised me, paid for my food and education, and that my grandparents had no right to replace him. He yelled about how I had failed everyone, and how this was all my fault. I tried to reason with him, explaining that my grandparents had been there for me in ways he and Mom never were, but he wouldn't listen. His accusations and the guilt-tripping made me question myself for a moment. Did I make the wrong choice in asking my grandparents? Update 1. Wow, I didn't expect so many comments on my post. After reading the advice, I do agree I need to cut my parents off for good. Their constant back and forth has taken a toll on my mental health. It's draining, and I can't keep letting them make me feel like I'm the problem. But how do you stop loving your parents? It's not that easy. Yet, for my peace of mind, I have no choice but to move forward without them and enjoy my wedding tomorrow. Update 2. Sorry for the lack of updates, things have been busy since the wedding. The big day went wonderfully. My grandparents walked me down the aisle, and Rob and I exchanged vows surrounded by love. My girlfriends and I had the time of our lives celebrating, and though I felt a pang of sadness watching Rob's family give speeches, I knew deep down I'd made the right choice. I'd prioritized my own happiness, which is something I hadn't done in years. Rob and I had a beautiful honeymoon, gifted by his parents, and I couldn't have asked for a better start to our life together. I didn't reach out to my parents after the wedding. I blocked them on everything because they don't deserve an explanation. I don't know if Vicki really had a housewarming, but at this point, I don't care. I wish them well, but I'm moving forward without them. Update 3. I wasn't going to post again, but something unexpected happened. While sorting through emails today, I found one from Vicki. I have no idea how she got my email, but I was surprised to see her name. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me, so I opened it. The email was a long apology from Vicki. She acknowledged her past mistakes, expressed regret for the pain she caused, and said she was genuinely happy for me now that I was married. She ended by asking me not to punish my parents by cutting them off, claiming they missed me. Reading her words stirred up so many emotions. Part of me wants to believe she's sincere and that she's changed, but another part of me is cautious. I know my parents haven't changed, they've shown me over the years that their priorities lie elsewhere. I thought about replying, but I'm not ready to forgive her. I don't know if I ever will, but I don't want to completely shut the door either. I realize now that after my marriage, I'm no longer alone. I have Rob, my supportive friends, and my loving grandparents. They are my real family. With their support, I'm stronger than ever. I've also scheduled an appointment with a therapist to help me work through the wounds from my past and heal.